Las Vegas has always been a city of contrasts, brilliant neon lights masking broad desert shadows, opulent casinos, just a stone's throw from forgotten alleyways, and fortunes made and lost in the span of minutes. But Las Vegas never expected that one of its most recognizable public figures would become the central character in a story as disturbing as any noir fiction. When the FBI unsealed the search warrants, reporters already sensed something was wrong. But even the most seasoned crime journalists weren't prepared for what lay beneath the surface of Rick Harrison's carefully curated empire. For over a decade, he had been welcomed into American homes as the smiling, savvy face of Pawn Stars, the man who turned dusty coins and antique swords into national television gold. What started as a pawn shop reality show evolved into a portrait of blue-collar entrepreneurship. Harrison was the everyman's historian, a dealer and legend. But in early 2025, that legend shattered. What agents found inside Rick Harrison's Las Vegas mansion wasn't just cause for arrest, it was a window into a reality nobody thought possible. By every outward measure, Harrison led a model life. Born in Lexington, North Carolina, in 1965, he grew up fighting childhood epilepsy, spending months confined to bed, discovering books as both companion and escape. Historical encyclopedias became his world. While other kids played outside, Rick immersed himself in timelines and treasure. Those chapters would later write the foundation of his brand, the wise, approachable expert who could appraise anything on sight. Moving west with his family in 1981, Harrison gravitated toward a city humming with constant reinvention, Las Vegas. By 1989, he and his father, Old Man Harrison, opened gold and silver pawn shop along a barely developed strip. It was small, cramped, unassuming. But soon it became the kind of place where anyone, gambler, tourist, or local, could walk in and leave with a deal or a story. In 2009, that story went national. Pawn Stars debuted on the History Channel. Viewers were drawn to the quirky regulars, the incredible finds, and most of all, the encyclopedic mind of Rick Harrison. He was a teacher disguised as a businessman, explaining the history behind Roman coins, Civil War rifles, and vintage Rolexes with the calm authority of a trusted uncle. Viewers came for the deals, but stayed because they believed in him. But in hindsight, the cracks were there, small anomalies that didn't quite fit. Members of the collecting community began questioning the provenance of certain items shown on the program. Historical societies noted inaccuracies in the documentation, and rumors began to spread. Was everything truly as authentic as it seemed? In late 2024, federal investigators officially began looking into gold and silver's transaction records. At first it appeared to be a standard financial audit, rumors of tax inconsistencies, or perhaps unreported sales. But the deeper investigators dug, the stranger things became. Deposits connected to overseas accounts, phone records showing ties to known black market traders in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and a clue buried in shipping invoices, artifacts being acquired through channels typically red-flagged by customs. Still, all of this was circumstantial, until the morning of January 9, 2025. At 6:15 a.m., in a coordinated raid involving federal agents, forensic specialists, and local law enforcement, Rick Harrison's 200-square-foot Las Vegas mansion was entered under sealed warrant. Neighbors reported hearing loud knocks, shouting, and eventually, the dull hum of power tools breaking through foundation walls. What began as a financial inquiry quickly morphed into a psychological labyrinth. Behind what appeared to be a decorative wine cabinet, agents discovered a false wall that led to a sealed chamber, a room meticulously engineered to be soundproof, temperature-controlled, and entirely off-grid. The only registrations tied to it were fake blueprints submitted during a property remodel in 2016. Inside that space, the agents found items that shouldn't exist. Historical artifacts still packaged in crates marked confiscated, some with military export tags from conflict regions in Iraq and Syria. Shelves stacked with black and white photos, annotated in handwritten Cyrillic, and several passports, all bearing Rick Harrison's face but different names. Items featured on national television just a few years prior, now found with labels contradicting their original verified history. Agents were stunned. Television appraisals had built Harrison's reputation on integrity, on transparency. But here were tangible signs of something else, an alternate version of Harrison, one that operated in shadows, navigated criminal networks, and blurred the line between collector and trafficker. And that was just the beginning. By midday, it was clear the mansion was no ordinary home. The FBI's evidence extraction teams had already filled 4 trucks with crates, containers and digital storage drives. But what they discovered in the mansion's western wing would redirect the investigation entirely, from suspicion of illegal antiquities, smuggling to what now looked like a premeditated and long-standing criminal enterprise. It was behind a seemingly modest study bookshelf. Again a false panel. Another secret room, but this one was different. Colder. A detached intelligence officer later described it as something out of a museum built by someone obsessed not with history, but with control. There, under soft ambient lighting and surgical-grade humidity control, were what appeared to be exact duplicates of items featured on Pawn Stars. Only they weren't duplicates. Handwritten diaries, spectral analysis, and carbon dating would later confirm that many of the versions shown on television were fakes, masterfully created by expert forgers. The real ones, the priceless artifacts, had been hidden here all along. The show had fed viewers a narrative of authenticity, when in fact, much of what America had admired on their screens had been orchestrated, a performance masking a deception. Critics had long suspected some items were too good to be true, but no one anticipated the extent. Items thought to have been logged into the Library of Congress registry somehow ended up in Harrison's collection. A Civil War surgeon's kit, alleged to be held by a Virginia museum, now matched by DNA test to one of Harrison's finds displayed on the show. Even a fragment from the Apollo 11 module, which NASA maintains was never publicly auctioned, sat on a sleek black mount inside his vault. Forensic analysts began to piece together timelines, connect transaction records, and trace how these pieces moved. The findings pointed to a sophisticated laundering system where academically significant items were swapped for duplicates, with the real artifacts hidden away for later personal sale or leverage. And yet this level of deception was still dwarfed by what agents uncovered next. In a corner of the hidden vault was an access door disguised as a reinforced support beam. Unlike the previous rooms, this one wasn't climate-controlled. It had no specialized lighting. What lay beyond was utilitarian, unfinished wood stairs descending into raw stone flooring. Investigators called it the pit, and what waited in the dark beneath shook even the most seasoned agents. In the chill and silence of that sub-basement space, 13 outline markings were discovered in the concrete, subtle depressions beneath thin tiles, some with disturbance lines indicating tampering. Initial suspicion was that it could be storage, perhaps stolen items buried below the foundation. But once the forensics team deployed ground-penetrating radar, their worst fears were confirmed. Bodies, multiple, buried with surgical precision, and in layers. The site was secured for 10 days as forensic archaeologists carefully exhumed remains, logging each separately, maintaining molecular integrity. It would eventually total 25 bodies, catalogued according to position, decomposition stage, and proximity. Early signs suggested the victims weren't random. Some bore dental implants registered under missing persons reports from as far back as 2006. Others had no identifying markers at all. To investigators, the implication was as horrific as it was undeniable. Rick Harrison may have leveraged his pawn empire not only to fund artifact trafficking, but to eliminate those who challenged or threatened that empire. Back above ground, digital analysts were working on over 47 hard drives and 18 cell phones recovered from safes scattered across the home. One of those phones contained a secure messaging app linked to a known antiquities mule in Istanbul. Another had a deleted folder that after recovery revealed travel logs, flights to Bulgaria, Jordan, Egypt and Mongolia. Cross-referenced with customs data, Harrison's name never appeared, but airport security footage, facial recognition software, and payment methods tied it all together. The final clue, a chilling crescendo, was a GoPro recording recovered from a recording closet. At first it seemed insignificant, an overhead view of Harrison inspecting an object, narrating as if for television. But as the video continued, it became clear this wasn't intended for broadcast. His tone shifted, precise, cold. He explained the modification of a provenance document, chuckled as he forged a signature from an overzealous benefactor, and discussed how the piece would be introduced on the show, with minimal scrutiny. He ended the video with a chilling phrase, one that stuck with agents for weeks: "They buy the story, not the truth. Make it sell." The case had officially mutated into something massive, not just crime, but fraud on a mythological scale. Television, history, trust, all weaponized with precision. As national media caught wind of the raid, questions erupted. How did this happen? How could a man held up as a symbol of self-made success, of accessible education and salt-of-the-earth values, become the epicenter of America's newest nightmare? Local headlines first, Pawn Star under investigation, then national ones, FBI raids Rick Harrison mansion, 25 dead discovered. Social media erupted in disbelief. Twitter timelines flooded with split-screen images of Harrison appraising antique firearms, cut beside crime scene photos. Reddit threads gained tens of thousands of upvotes within hours, morphing from speculation into digital autopsies of Pawn Stars episodes the way conspiracy theorists once dissected the Zapruder film. But for many viewers, particularly the faithful fans who had followed the show for years, the reaction was visceral. It wasn't just the shock of murder, it was the betrayal. This wasn't another celebrity scandal. This was Rick, the man who laughed with his son on camera, who explained historical artifacts like a favorite teacher, who told America every night that everything has a story. Now viewers were asking, was any of it real? Pawn Stars production company issued a swift, sterile statement. We are cooperating with authorities, and deeply saddened by the unfolding events. At this time production has been indefinitely suspended. Internally executives scrambled. The History Channel pulled reruns from its rotation. Licensing partners withheld payments. Antique dealers who once begged to have their collections featured on the show now deleted high-profile posts and scrubbed digital associations with the Harrison name. What made it worse was the silence coming from Rick's family, the same family viewers had come to see as their own. Corey Harrison, Rick's son and longtime co-star, was reportedly blindsided. Sources close to him said he learned about the raid through news alerts before the FBI showed up at his own home with a subpoena. His first public comment came 4 days later via a shaky Instagram video, visibly distressed. If this is true, I didn't know. I swear to God, that's not the dad I knew. The internet didn't know what to make of it. Some rallied behind Corey, calling him a victim of deceit. Others weren't so sure. Hadn't he been in the business all along? How much could he really have missed? Then there was Chumlee, Austin Russell, whose primary role on the show was comic relief, the goofy cousin with a heart of gold and a knack for rare sneakers. His reaction came via TMZ, captured outside a Las Vegas car wash where paparazzi asked for comment. He looked pale, stunned. I always thought Rick was strict about business, but I mean this? Nah man. This is insane to me. Yet evidence suggested that Chumlee may not have been entirely in the dark. FBI reports indicated that he had flagged at least 2 transactions over the years, involving items of dubious origin. He even joked once, off camera, but picked up on a hot mic. Hope the feds don't come knocking for that Egyptian cat. Thing looked cursed. What had once been entertainment now blurred into tragedy. In Las Vegas, the gold and silver pawn shop instantly became a ghost town. Tour buses used to line up daily outside the building, packed with fans hoping to catch a glimpse of one of the show's stars. Now only 2 unmarked security cars sat out front, flanked by yellow crime scene tape and media vans. The building was declared a federal asset pending forfeiture, its doors sealed until the investigation concluded. Local tourism officials issued statements to downplay the scandal's impact, but the damage had already been done. Businesses nearby reported a 60% drop in foot traffic that week. Some shop owners placed red X's on their windows in protest, blaming the Harrisons for what they called a betrayal of trust and a stain on the city. Inside law enforcement circles, the case continued to unravel in unsettling directions. Tip lines flooded with calls. Former employees, some long removed from the show, began coming forward with stories of off-hours meetings, transactions that were never written down, and shipments that went out the back. One former assistant under protection described Rick as 2 people. The man in front of the camera was charming, joking, even fatherly. But for those behind the scenes, there was a strict chain of command, secrecy, and a chilling intolerance for dissent. If you asked the wrong questions, she said, you were either ignored or gone. Psychologists were quick to frame Rick's profile as that of a controlled dual-identity sociopath. His public persona was meticulously manufactured, reinforced daily on-screen and in interviews. But beneath that surface lay behaviors suggesting clinical compartmentalization, the ability to flip personas like a switch. In many ways, that was what shocked people the most. It wasn't just that Rick Harrison might have killed people. It was that he did so without ever showing a crack in his smile. The trial of Rick Harrison began 5 months after the FBI's shocking raid on his Las Vegas mansion, but by that time, the world had already rendered its verdict. Across social media, Harrison had become a meme, the once beloved face of Americana now photoshopped onto mugshots and villain archetypes. But behind the noise was something much heavier, much more real. 25 families waiting to hear what happened to their loved ones, and a country reckoning with how easily trust had been manipulated by a man who lived right in front of their eyes for more than a decade. The prosecution entered the courtroom, armed with what could only be described as a mountain of evidence, over 900 pages of forensic documentation, more than 40 terabytes of digital correspondence, encrypted messages, financial records, and surveillance, and perhaps most damning of all, the artifacts themselves, sacred cultural property from nations across the globe, some of it listed as missing for decades, or believed to be destroyed. But artifacts were only part of the picture. DNA evidence found in the sub-basement matching 23 out of the 25 bodies, intercepted communications pointing to hit contracts masked as deal closures, multiple bank accounts in shell corporations traced back to Harrison, each one lined with money laundering patterns detailed with frightening efficiency. The biggest bombshell was when a former associate, name withheld for their safety, took the stand and identified Rick Harrison as the man who had orchestrated the silencing of competitors in the illicit antiquities trade. With a trembling voice, they detailed how Harrison lured clients and rivals alike, promising partnerships, only to erase any threat to his empire. He didn't just want to be the best in the business, they testified. He wanted to be the only one left standing. The courtroom gasped more than once during the 6-week trial. Footage presented by federal prosecutors showed private off-air recordings where Harrison dryly discussed known forgeries, making it onto the air for dramatic effect, not just without producer knowledge, but sometimes despite their objections. He controlled everything, one producer stated during questioning. It wasn't just his shop, it was his show, his world. Harrison's defense team pieced together an elaborate counter-narrative. They blamed rogue employees, claimed digital evidence had been framed with deep fakes, and painted Harrison as a victim of a global scheme to take him down. One orchestrated, they said, by organized crime circles he had inadvertently crossed paths with while sourcing rare items. Harrison took the stand midway through the trial, a move some say sealed his fate. The man who had charmed America with his encyclopedic recall and fatherly smirk now looked hollow, sunken by stress, white-knuckling the sides of the witness stand. At times he broke down when speaking of his childhood, the long nights reading alone with seizures raging through him. At other times, he couldn't help but slip into the confident tone that made him famous, as though trying to rewrite the narrative even now. But prosecutors were prepared. With surgical precision, they peeled away every claim like layers of an onion. A provenance letter he insisted was real was shown, under forensic UV lighting, to contain ink MIT concluded had been manufactured in 2019. A claim that he'd never been to Turkey was immediately followed with facial recognition footage from Istanbul's airport, time-stamped and undisputable. At one point the prosecutor asked him directly, "Mr. Harrison, even if we believed every word of your story, can you explain the bodies?" Harrison paused, visibly shaken, then finally said, "No, I can't." 6 hours of jury deliberation, that's all it took. Guilty, on every count. Multiple charges of first-degree murder, smuggling of protected cultural artifacts, wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, 3 federal racketeering charges, and perhaps most hauntingly, 1 count for each of the 25 murdered victims, unlawful concealment of remains with intent to suppress criminal liability. The judge, a man known for his restraint, showed visible emotion as he read Harrison's sentence. "You presented yourself as a man of knowledge, entrusted by the public, celebrated by museums, scholars and millions of viewers. You took that trust and used it as a weapon. You didn't just forge history, you buried it. And worse, you buried people who got in your way." The final punishment, life imprisonment without parole, served consecutively for each murder, plus federal forfeiture of all property, assets and intellectual rights related to Pawn Stars. The gold and silver pawn shop never reopened. The building was condemned, gutted, and demolished within months. In its place, Las Vegas officials promised a monument to truth, though some skeptics argue the city would rather erase the memory than confront it.
Tourists still visit the site, not for autographs or photos, now, only to stare across the empty lot and whisper about what used to be. In the aftermath, more victims' families stepped forward, some with closure, others with nothing but grief. Their loved ones had been dealers, traders, even whistleblowers. One mother, whose son vanished in 2012, after claiming to discover fakes tied to a private collector, said in court, "I thought I'd never know what happened to him. I never thought the man responsible would be someone I watched on TV every week." Netflix released a documentary 6 weeks after the verdict. Pawned, The Fall of Rick Harrison attracted over 80 million views in its first 5 days. In it, former friends, colleagues, law enforcement officials, and historians picked through the legacy Harrison had left behind. "He was a great performer," one curator noted. "He didn't sell objects, he sold a sense of wonder, one we wanted to believe in." Podcasts debated how much the network knew. Were the producers complicit? Had they ever questioned the inconsistencies? Lawsuits began circling in entertainment media, including a class action suit filed by a group of collectors, claiming damages from buying items featured on the show that were later proven to be forgeries. The ripple effect stretched deep, but perhaps the deepest wound was the emotional one, not just for those he killed, but for a public that had come to believe in him. Rick Harrison had represented something wholesome to many, a rags to riches story, dressed in denim, and loaded with facts, an image of the everyday American, who overcame obstacles through intellect, curiosity, and hard work. Losing that, discovering it had all been a lie, left millions grappling with more than just shock. It left behind distrust, because if Rick Harrison, that guy, could lie so well, so completely, and for so long, who else? Commentators pondered aloud whether our obsession with fame makes us blind, whether we confuse expertise with ethics, charisma with character. In a world where polished storytelling rules every timeline and screen, had we lost our ability to question the people behind the curtain? In the closing moments of the trial, a mural was painted on a wall near downtown Las Vegas. It showed Rick Harrison, split down the middle, one side, cheerful, holding a Revolutionary War musket, and smiling in mid-deal. The other, hollow-eyed, handcuffed in front of a wall of ancient masks, his own peeled away. Beneath it, the caption, "History can't be pawned, only hidden, until it finds its way home." The Rick Harrison case will live on not just as one of the most chilling betrayals of public trust in recent American history, but as a parable for the digital age, that no matter how entertaining, no matter how familiar, no matter how trustworthy someone seems, the truth is never just what's shown on camera. Sometimes, the real story is buried deep, behind the walls, between the lines, in the darkness. People work so hard to hide, and sometimes, what we've taken for authenticity, was only ever the performance of a lifetime.